Justin handed this to me and he said, hey, before you say anything, Matt, we need you to just to read something. And I'm sure this is kind of standard league kinds of stuff, but I told him I would before I said anything, so I better cover this. The views, expressions, and opinions you're about to hear do not necessarily represent those of the Utah League of Cities and Towns, Board of Directors, or its employees. Test results show that after prolonged exposure to this content, lab rats did indeed experience a drop in IQ. The only animals harmed in the production of this program are those that contributed to the carne asada burritos during the preparation. Listen at your own risk, listener discretion advised. Probably standard Utah League stuff. I'm sure they have everybody that's required to cover that before they get into it. You're a great crowd. So it's an honor to be broadcasting our podcast with a live studio audience from, what city are we in? North Salt Lake City, right? You are a city, right? North Salt Lake? Okay, now I can say that because I'm a part of a club, and it's the club where the forefathers had zero creativity club when they named your city, right? I'm from South Ogden. And it seems to me like going back, like, what were they thinking to name a city after its geological location next to another city? And so I could share in your pain. How often do I say, no, yeah, South Ogden is a city? Oh, I thought you were just South Ogden area. No, we're our own city. So good to be here in North Salt Lake. Today on our podcast, we're going to be covering an important topic. We're going to be talking about infrastructure. And, you've had a great lineup today. You've talked about legal stuff. You've talked about planning. You've talked about finance and budget. But we're going to talk about some real cool stuff as far as infrastructure. Let's do it. So let's first off define, what do we mean when we say infrastructure? This is all the stuff that it takes, all the supporting pipes and streets and systems and poles and vehicles and buildings that it takes to provide the local government services that all of our communities provide. Fair enough? Pretty broad topic. It's infrastructure, okay? And we're going to spend a little time just giving you some ideas on maybe some questions that you should or could be asking when you go back and you embark on this journey of local government. Oh, we do have the opportunity during the podcast to address fan mail and provide some local government tidbits. So let's do a tidbit. If your head isn't already swimming with acronyms, it will be by the end of the day, right? You'll find that local government, we have our share of acronyms. I remember when I first started years ago, the head was swimming. And fun story about our beloved Cameron Deal. When he first started with the Utah League, he had just finished an internship and got hired on, and he was so excited. I'll never forget the first day that he showed up for one of Meg Ryan's luau trainings, and this is a picture of Cam showing up for the luau, all ready for Kahlua Pig and hula dancing, and it was hard to be the one that broke it to him. He said, this is not the luau you were looking for. Right? And luau, as you may have learned or will learn, is the Land Use Academy of Utah. And the Utah League provides this training. It's excellent land use training that you all have the opportunity to partake of. So don't get discouraged. We've all been there. Acronyms are aplenty in local government. Okay, infrastructure. There is a report, we're not going to spend a lot of time on it, but there is a report that was done in 2020 on the state of Utah's infrastructure as a whole. And I think there's some great takeaways from this report for all of us at local government. And you can see the reference there. It's done by a bunch of engineers, and they review it, and then this report is submitted. Here's some of the statistics there. Talks about the state of our infrastructure, some of the needs, $4.4 billion in drinking water over the next 20 years. I know Scott Paxman was here today, talked about some of the infrastructure needs on water as well. Some more here about our streets, $842 million in wastewater needs. So this report was prepared in 2020. How'd we score? Here's the criteria that was used to evaluate the state's infrastructure. I think this is a good takeaway and something that we could ask ourselves about our own infrastructure as far as this criteria. What is our current capacity? What's the current condition? How are we doing funding, operation, and maintenance? Are we collecting enough income and revenue in those different utilities to pay and to replace the equipment and infrastructure we need? And how's our future planning? Are we collecting enough now to fund those projects in year 3, 5, 10, and into the future? So, some great things. How did Utah do? C+. Now, if Tom were here, he'd be dancing, because it was news to him when we did this that the report card actually went left of D, and that there was such a thing as A, B, and C. We have fun with that. Anyway, we had a C+. For some homes, they'll celebrate a C+. Others, it's like, oh, come on, we could do better. But how do we compare? Here's some of the media coverage. A whopping C+ was the best in the country. Huh? Best in the country. Yet one more area in which Utah ranks best in the country. That list is getting bigger, isn't it? All right, now, lest we get too proud and too excited about our C+ being best in the country, the report also, and some of the media reminded us, we still have billions with a B, billions of dollars of infrastructure needs in our future. So let's celebrate the fact we're leading the country, but then get to work, because we've literally have billions of dollars of needs. So here's some recommendations or some solutions. We'll just refer to those at the end of this podcast. We'll refer back. Whoa! Okay. So you've met Carson Ellers. Carson is the legislative research analyst here at the Utah League, does a phenomenal job. He did a little research, sent me a little tidbit. Matt and Tom love your show. Just thought you'd be interested in this little local government tidbit. I've done some research. The first Utah legislative session was January 13th, 1896. There were 18 senators and 45 members of the House. Can you imagine that? That was a long time ago. To put it into perspective, to help you understand, Roger II, General Counsel and Senior Policy Analyst, was only 18 years old. To help put that into perspective. Boom, boom, boom. We're here at least for the next 15 minutes. So, let's talk about why is infrastructure important, okay? I want to use the example of South Jordan, Mayor Ramsey. Let's use her great city. I'm just going to throw this up here. Look at the revenues that South Jordan City, look at the revenues that flow through that organization. Governmental funds, that's your general fund, debt service, capital projects. Business funds, right? Those are your enterprise, your utilities, your water, sewer. So look at the cash, right, that flows in and out of an organization like South Jordan. Now, let's look at the capital assets that it takes to support that kind of operation. Now, if you're in a city like mine, my head's already exploding, because I can't even imagine talking about, hundreds of millions of dollars. South Jordan's a sizable organization. They have $530 million of capital assets that are depreciating every day. Just I think this was 2020 data, just in fiscal year 2020, they added $53 million of new assets to their governmental funds. And they added 16 million new into their business funds. So, but how many of you are sitting there going, yeah, that's a big deal if you're South Jordan, but we're not South Jordan, right? I'm raised and I live in Plain City. Anybody know where Plain City is? Speaking of lacking a little originality in naming a city, I think Plain City might be just a notch above, based off our geographical location to another city. So things are pretty ordinary and plain in Plain City, and I'm proud to be a part of it. So let's go to Plain City and look at their funds. How many revenues flow through their population? For those of you who don't know Plain City, we're probably 7,000 or 8,000 residents now, and growing. 5.1 million. What about capital assets? $23 million. So even for a city, I don't think they have more than 12 full-time employees. Now put this into the private sector. perspective. If you owned a corporation, your own private business, and you generated $5 million of annual revenue, you're probably a pretty sizable small business. That's a good little business. And if it took $23 million of equipment and assets to manage that business, how important are those assets to you in your private business? And even an organization as small as Plain City has a pretty substantial amount of infrastructure and assets that need to be maintained. Now, some of you are probably even smaller than Plain City. Did a little research. The smallest town that are members of the Utah League. Any takers? Schofield. Schofield has 28 residents. Okay? They have about $60,000 of total revenue annually. And even the smallest town that's a member with 28 residents, Schofield has almost $2 million of capital assets that 28 group of population has to figure out how to maintain and take care of. So, is infrastructure an important topic? And should we as local government officials be paying attention to how well we're planning for and maintaining our infrastructure? I hope that answers that question. Oh! But if it were easy, right, Washington Terrace would have figured it out years ago, right? He's not here to defend himself, so I'm going to throw my colleague Tom, who's normally with me on the show. He's the city manager in Washington Terrace. Neighboring cities, we're good friends, get along fine, so I can poke fun. But there are definitely some challenges that we encounter when we try to tackle our infrastructure. So we want to talk about what you might experience as some of those challenges. First off, we have some external things. When I say external, those are things that maybe we have very little, if any, control over. We talk about changes in regulations and rules, state and federal. Those kind of things just come crashing down on us. And now all of a sudden, the standards for our stormwater management just went from, a 2 to an 8 on the scale of 1 to 10. What does that mean for us? Well, we now have new things we have to invest in, maybe new personnel, new processes, new equipment. Local legislation in our state. We don't always have control over that. We might try to influence that, but ultimately we don't. Natural disasters, economy. So should we be thinking about these things as we're working on our infrastructure? Should we be planning and preparing for what happens if this happens, right? Along the Wasatch Front, we live on a fault line, right? What kind of impacts will those things have on our infrastructure? We say everything's Ogden's fault up where I'm from, so whose fault is it, right? But we all live along the fault, and we ought to be thinking about what that event will mean, and do we have reserves in place to recover and to help us get things back into operation in the event that some of these unforeseen things happen. So, we don't want to spend a lot of time. I'd like to spend more time on maybe some of the stuff we have a little more control over. But first, let's do a tidbit. So, we've got an announcement. This one's kind of fun. Nick Jarvis. I don't know if any of you want to try to pick him out of a lineup. 1 to 4. Okay? I'll spare you the pain. All right. The Utah League's own Nick Jarvis. Super nice guy. He's done a lot of help. He reaches out to the community. He serves. And last summer, he spent an entire summer. Speaking of acronyms, you've all probably heard of the NIMBY acronym, right? So Nick spent an entire summer. I want to bring up the next slide. He's been working with Bob and Ima Heckler, and his whole goal was to help them. And Ima was so impressed that she wrote a book called Once I Was a NIMBY, and it's an incredible conversion story with Bob and Ima Heckler. And Nick's going to be on the show next week, and Bob and Ima are going to be here. We're going to talk about this incredible conversion story and her book, Once I Was a NIMBY. So stay tuned, and Nick, excellent work. Back to challenges. Now, these are some of the things that we as local government officials probably have more control over. But trust me, as you start to get serious about infrastructure, these challenges are going to become really apparent. Can we catch up? You know, it's easy to throw up our hands and just say, we are so far behind, right? We are in such disrepair that maybe it's easier just to pass the buck to the next mayor and the next council, the next administration. And that can be easy, especially when you're tempted, right? We're going to talk about some other things. Maybe some of the community expectations, right? Do I want to be the council member and the mayor that's known for raising rates and raising fees to put infrastructure in the ground that no one can play on, that no one can see? That's a tough position to be in as an elected official, but it's reality. It's reality, and elected officials are oftentimes put in that really difficult position. I want to build the rec center. I want to build the park because our community can see it and they can enjoy it. So let's just pass and push that underground infrastructure, some of those things, a little later, a little longer, and inevitably what happens? You know, it just becomes more and more of a challenge for a community to take seriously when they're ready to take it seriously. Aversion to rate increases, right? Nobody wants to have to raise rates or have the discussion about property tax increases to address especially things like infrastructure. The city next door. Now, inevitably, as a council member, when your staff and you as a group start to talk about your rates, it's a real big temptation to say, yeah, well, what do the neighbors charge for their water? And what do they charge for their sewer? And I don't discourage that because it's just the natural, curious thing to ask. But think about, for a moment, the fact that your infrastructure is your infrastructure, right? Your systems are your systems. The age, the way it's designed, whether your system has pumps or it's gravity fed or you have wells and you treat your own water versus the neighbor that might purchase their water. So don't fall into what I think is a fallacy of putting a lot of weight for your rate structure and what your community needs because you want to compare well to your neighbors. Fair enough? Because that's a real temptation for elected officials in the position that you're in, is to say, well, we don't want to be the city that's got the highest rates in the county. That's fair. But just keep in mind that your needs are not your neighbor's needs. And maybe there's some things you can learn from your neighbors. You know, why is it that you can operate your system at a lower rate? You know, maybe their infrastructure isn't being addressed. So, careful with some of these internal challenges. Other priorities, you know, personnel, we talked about that. As far as other priorities we talked about, there's always going to be other needs. The community is always going to be demanding more splash pads, more rec centers, the fun stuff, you know, more programming, but we can't fall victim to ignoring our infrastructure for those things. Lack of funding, you know, that's an easy one. It's just hard. And I would just put forward that you have a lot of power within your organization to generate the funding you need for your infrastructure. Right? You have the ability. Whether or not you have the political will and the strength to do what needs to be done is another thing. But you certainly can raise rates and raise revenue. You also have the ability to analyze operations and try to make sure you're running efficiently. So some of the challenges that you will inevitably come across as you tackle infrastructure. I love that. I want to like go buy a truck or something when I hear this. Is this off of a commercial? All right. So what are our opportunities? Okay, let's talk about moving forward as newly elected officials. What are some of the opportunities? Well, it's your moment in time. You've been elected to serve this term. It might be the only term, or it might be the first of many other terms, but the time is yours to envision that future. Where is your community headed? What's the vision for your community? And I'm thinking more broadly than just infrastructure, right? What's the long-term vision of your community? What's your vision statement as a community? How do you want your children and your grandchildren to describe living in your community in 50 years? Let's start with that big picture, and then let's back down to say, what's the supporting infrastructure it will take to have that result, right? And so you have the opportunity to envision, to start understanding what will be required, you have the opportunity to start understanding what's the reality. If this is where we want to be, where are we today? And flash back to that slide with the state report. What's our capacity? What's the condition? How's our operation and maintenance? And are we collecting enough revenue to fund future projects? Okay? So the opportunity is yours. And then, of course, you have the opportunity to make those decisions and to chart the course. Maybe many of you are already on track. You've got things in place. That's great. Maybe some of you are a little behind or a lot behind. So I would just challenge you to look at that and decide how serious you want to be. All right. If there's one slide I want you to leave with, it would be this. This is what we put together is just maybe some best practices. First, every one of your business funds, your enterprises, should have capital facilities master plans. Right? This is our water capital facility plan. It talks about all of the system, our entire system. It talks about the needed improvements over the next 5-10 years or more. And these are the projects. So be aware that you should have these plans and they should be updated regularly. Now, if you're a faster growing community, that might need to be every few years you update your capital facilities plan. Or if you're a slower growing community, that it might be a little longer period in between. The idea is, do we have plans? What are they? And then what are the projects in each of those plans? Every plan will call out the projects that your systems need. And then talk about financial planning. How are we going to fund those projects? What adjustments might we need to make so that we can fund the necessary projects? And then, rely on the experts. Most of you have staff, whether that's contracted engineers or public works officials and other staff that can advise you and help you get an understanding and an assessment of where you're at. And then the last part really falls on you. Representing staff, it's easy for us to come and say, here's the plan, here's all the projects. All you need to do is raise rates by 20% and we can do this. Right? That's the easy side. The hard side is on your side of the table when you have to make those decisions to say, what can our community support? And are we willing to do this? And if so, how do we take this? I would encourage you, if you are behind, to look at it over a multi-year process. Take it and say, hey, if we could go here this year, then let's go to here the next year. A big part of that is getting out ahead of that with public education. Help your residents and your constituents understand the state of your infrastructure so that when you come forward with a rate increase or a property tax increase, it won't be the first time they're hearing about the need in your community. Utilizing newsletters, social media, however you communicate with your constituents, bring them up to speed, educate them on this is the state of our infrastructure. These are the steps we feel are responsible and necessary for our community. And help yourselves with managing those expectations of your community and get their support to support you in your infrastructure. Ho! All right. Well, you've had the opportunity to meet Justin, okay? Justin is truly a government relations guy. I mean, this guy is the most connected person you'll ever want to meet. And he knows just everybody, right? And Justin's been working with the league and utilizing his connections to help us address the Utah housing crisis. So Justin, believe it or not, this is going to floor many of you, but actually was able to arrange for Bob and Wendy, Bob the Builder. I don't know how many of you know Bob. My kids growing up, Bob the Builder was a hero in our home. And Bob and Wendy aren't building much anymore. They're a little older, so they do a lot of consulting and speaking. Justin has arranged to have Bob and Wendy come in March, University of Utah, Rice-Eccles, and they're going to talk about how to solve the Utah housing crisis. True story. The title of the speech, Utah housing crisis, we can fix it, we're not that dense. Thank you. I'll be here for the next 30 seconds. All right, thanks, Justin. Great work. So, last slide, I think. Best time to raise infrastructure money? Probably 30 years ago, right? Second best time, start today, right? Let's start addressing our infrastructure and see what we need. Folks, thank you. If you like the podcast, reach out to my elected officials. Say, hey, keep him employed, keep him happy. If you didn't like the presentation, reach out to my elected officials. Tell them that you appreciated the presentation and to keep me employed and keep me happy. You guys have been great.